introducing the next panel debate. It's crossing the digital divide through collaboration, and with thanks to our sponsor TDNet as well for that. But I'll now just pass you straight over to the chair, Liz Sayce, who will introduce herself and the panelists involved in the debate.
John, and it's great to be here with everybody. My name's Liz. My own background's in disability rights and mental health policy, and I suppose I've been concerned about the digital divide as it affects disabled people for a long time. I used to work with somebody who was blind, who had got a great degree from a good university, got in to do a master's and then dropped out because the resources available to him and the systems available to him just weren't accessible. So there's those sorts of bits of digital divide. But also I think COVID has shown us, that some of the inequalities have grown, but there are also new solutions coming through. I know, a number of non-governmental organisations in the UK that have really gone the extra mile to make sure that people who would normally be going into a library or normally accessing, broadband through a cafe or whatever, aren't losing out. So I hope this session is going to give us lots of solutions to crossing the digital divide, and we've got some fantastic speakers. So I'm going to introduce each one in turn. Each person is going to speak for 5 minutes, and then at the end of that, we're going to open it up for questions, comments from everybody. Okay, so first up, I'm delighted to invite Peter Berkery from the Coalition for Diversity and Inclusion in Scholarly Communications to address us. Peter.
Liz, I know Peter is still around. If we could move to the next panelist, that would be great. Peter is in the building, as it were. He's just not accessible via this screen at this point in time.
Good morning, speaker. My name is Naomi. I hope you can all hear me. I'm an assistant librarian at University of East London. I'm currently in Barbados, and today I will be sharing some thoughts that I've been developing with my dissertation supervisor. I'm currently doing a master's in librarianship at UCL, but before that I was doing a master's in race and resistance, and I feel it's very important to be applying a critical race theory to librarianship. I'm sure we're all aware of issues within librarianship, racial issues. There's been a lot in terms of, I know in the UK at least, a movement called Decolonize the Library, or some other universities call it Liberating the Library. So I'm coming today from that perspective. I'm arguing that when we look at digital inequality, we can't just be saying that it's a class problem. I know in the UK there's a lot of information about how a lot of families are currently unable to access Wi-Fi, digital devices due to poverty. But as sociology highlights, class and race are intersectional, and there's been studies done in America that confirm that minorities in America, African Americans, Hispanics, Native Americans, are the ones who are disproportionately affected by information inequality, whether that's they don't have access to Wi-Fi, they don't have access to devices. And I feel that conversation needs to be started in the UK, Europe, and well, throughout the world. So that's what I'm going to be discussing today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's move on then to our next speaker, who's David Bukenya, who's a librarian, systems and technical services at Ugandan Christian University and the EIFL country coordinator. David.
Thank you everybody. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about this very important topic about the digital divide. My first rhetoric would be about the importance of the internet, really. It has become very critical here, particularly in Africa. It's not only providing key information, but we know that it's connecting communities, particularly during this pandemic time. And we're also realizing that it's going to be very important in actually enabling restoration, basically in many sectors which have been affected by the pandemic. Last year, the theme of the Internet Governance Forum talked about Internet for human resilience and solidarity. And I think it couldn't have been said better, indeed, because I think we need to be elastic, we need to be united, we indeed need to use the Internet for our own good and progress. The pandemic has also, further highlighted the depth and magnitude, really, of the divide. And at the height of the consequent lockdowns, it was eroding progress and setting back communities that were literally disconnected from within and the rest of the world. And that was very true in my country, Uganda. Libraries, like other entities, were closed. We realized that. Information sharing was curtailed. Students had no remote access to their digital libraries to support their online learning. Librarians were frustrated and they felt stuck with the latent service whose print complement basically had been rendered a public health risk. Also for those who had computing devices, it became rather clear that the internet was unaffordable for many. Okay, they couldn't afford it, and the investments in digital literacy, capacity building were all rendered futile. And even for those who had access to the internet and the requisite digital skills, these still suffered because they had no digital access to local content. There were also corporate restrictions, and the acquisition of e-books was a problem as these emerged as major challenges for librarians trying to provide basically support for e-learning during the pandemic. Those devices and internet connectivity, I would say, just simply resigned and endured the pangs of the lockdown. It became apparent that fulfilling the matrix of complete access would basically, which comprises of infrastructure, digital literacy, and the semantics of the content of our library patrons remained really a big challenge. So we observe that the digital divide is not indeed a single split, which creates discrete disparity among individuals and groups of people. The several aspects related to not only availability of the internet connection, but also the quality of the internet was critical. And the performance of the devices that patrons were using was an issue. And of course, lack of the technical support and availability of content, literacy, which all further compounded the divide. And I would just like to say, indeed, the irony of the divide starts with the technology itself. So, work in my country, Uganda, to really improve digital access and inclusion is so much in the oven. We have about 45% of internet penetration here and about 26 million mobile users, but still we feel there's much more to do because of the availability of information communication technologies. We feel that's an amenable platform to actually improve things because it has become essential and urgent in society. And this has only intensified the need for us to ensure that all the components that enable complete digital access are available. So indeed, as libraries and information or content handlers who provide key research information and provide learning support services, we need to have an opportunity to build onto this and reduce the gap. So I'll be really talking mostly about libraries and how we can reduce the gap with publishers. Thank you very much.
Very much, David, and I think that's adding richness to what we've heard so far, that this is not simple. we're talking about poverty, we're talking about the multifaceted ways that the digital divide operates, we're talking about different nations, we're talking about ethnicity and more. I think we now do have Peter. That's Peter Berkery from the Coalition for Diversity and Inclusion. Am I right? And if so, I welcome you to the virtual stage.
In North America. My name's Peter Berkery. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm speaking to you from the traditional land of the Miccosukee and Seminole people in Florida. I am here today representing the Coalition for Diversity and Inclusion in Scholarly Communications. Although my day job has been, for the past 8 years, I've had the privilege of serving as the executive director for the Association of University Presses. AU Presses, as we shorthand ourselves, is one of 10 founding members of the Coalition for Diversity and Inclusion in Scholarly Communications. And we first came together perhaps 3 years ago. We were formally founded about a year ago after a perhaps lengthy but a really useful process of iterating and incubating what we hope to become as a community, as a coalition. If on the outside chance there's anyone in attendance today who's interested in how organizations get built, I would commend to your attention a group out of, they're either Atlanta, Georgia or Greensboro, North Carolina, called Educopia. They incubate nonprofits in the higher education space. And the woman who does it is a miracle worker. Again, that's educopia.edu. So we were formed, the coalition was formed to discuss and address issues of diversity and inclusion across the scholarly communications ecosystem. As some of you will be aware, a number of surveys in recent years have shed light on the lack of diversity in scholarly communications. We are disproportionately white. We are disproportionately abled. We are disproportionately cisgendered, and we are disproportionately male in executive ranks. There's two baseline surveys now on diversity in publishing, at least, that have been conducted by a small children's publisher in New York, Lee and Low, and they demonstrate these trends very clearly. And in fact, tomorrow, the Association of University Presses will be releasing data demonstrating similar challenges within the university press publishing sector. And in that article, in fact, we'll refer to similar studies that have been done in the library sector. So we know we're not a model of inclusivity. Meanwhile, scholarly communications is becoming a truly global enterprise where the lack of diversity becomes increasingly problematic. So if I could have the next slide, please. Just a little bit about the coalition. Part of our incubation process was to give some real thought about a mission, a vision, and a set of values. So we're a coalition of organizations, associations, and learned societies. Our mission is to work with those organizations and with the individuals in them to build equity, inclusion, diversity, and accessibility across scholarly communications. And by doing so, we envision a socially just community of practice that welcomes, values, and celebrates all who seek to contribute to scholarly communications. And our values include respect by valuing differences and by welcoming diverse perspectives, by listening to learn from different communities and to make space for marginalized voices, and acting to eliminate barriers, and importantly, to serve as an active ally. If I could have the next slide, please. So as I think it's probably pretty clear, our overall goal is to increase diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in scholarly communications while valuing differences, welcoming diverse perspectives, learning from different communities, making space for marginalized voices, and serving as allies. To accomplish that, we're committed to eliminating barriers to participation, extending equitable opportunities across all stakeholders, ensuring that our practices and our policies promote equitable treatment and do not allow, condone, or result in discrimination, ensuring full participation in programs, policy formulation, and decision-making for all identity groups, raising awareness about career opportunities in our industries to groups who are currently underrepresented, and supporting our members in achieving diversity and inclusion within individual organizations. And I'll spend just a moment talking a little bit about the work that we're doing toward those ends. So if I could have the next slide. There are, in fact, 5 ways that one can participate in C4 DISC. One can join as a member, and membership is generally open to other membership organizations, not to say individual publishers or individual libraries. Those categories can participate by becoming C4 DISC partners. Certainly, individuals have the opportunity to both donate and to volunteer. And as you'll hear in a minute, we're blessed with an abundance of volunteers at the moment. And then finally, and importantly, to adopt our set of statement of principles, which you can find on our website, c4disc.org, which commits an organization, an individual, a publisher, a librarian, to C4 DISC's principles, which I think I've articulated probably too many times already. Next slide. Just a quick overview of who at least our initial founding members and some of our first early partners were, to give you a sense that this is, while perhaps the center of gravity might be in North America, you can see clearly through the participation of groups like UKSG and ALPSP that this is truly a global commitment. This actually reflects the state of play when we formally launched last March. Our membership has increased substantially since that time. Next slide, please. So the work of the coalition is conducted through working groups, and basically volunteers who are affiliated with either members or partners bring forth proposals for a working group, and the proposal would include funding. And if the coalition has the resources to fund it, or to find the resources to fund it, the working group moves forward. And currently we have 3 working groups: one on communications and outreach, one on the creation of training resources, best practices, toolkits, and documentation, and one that's responsible for hosting or sponsoring programs, curriculums, events, publications, and presentations. Next slide. And the most active of these is our communications and outreach group. They're currently working on one of their working groups is producing toolkits for equity. It's a set of 3 kind of practical guides, one for allies, one for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and one for organizations. And it's meant to provide practical guidance on how to actually do the work of anti-racism and to engage in conversations that certainly in a US and probably in a global context were crystallized and catalyzed by the murder last year of George Floyd. And so the 3 toolkits, one of them has been launched. The other 2 are currently in production and should be out by mid-year. And to give you an indication of the interest level in our activities, we currently have probably over 50 volunteers working on the 2 remaining toolkits. So there's been broad, gratifying, appropriate uptake across the ecosystem to the work that we've been doing. I'll say apropos to today's topic that while certainly we're confident that we've started in the right place, we're aware that race and gender are just 2 axes of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we do look forward, moving forward, to address issues along other axes, such as the digital divide. So the last slide is just very quickly to say thank you. There's our contact details. You can find our statement of principles and the first of the 3 anti-racism toolkits at c4disc.org. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks very much. Can I just encourage people to start thinking, if you've got questions, do put them in the live Q&A and we will come to as many of them as we can at the end. But meanwhile, I'm delighted to introduce Professor Tim Reynolds, who's Executive Director of the National Institute for Student Success at Georgia State University. Tim, over to you.
Honored to be here today. I'm not a librarian. I lead our student success efforts at Georgia State. What that means is that I'm the person involved in creating programs to keep our students enrolled and progressing and hopefully graduating with meaningful degrees. Georgia State University is a very unique sort of place. We're distinguished by our geography. I'm sitting a couple blocks away from Ebenezer Baptist Church, where the Reverend Martin Luther King was head pastor. His birthplace and his gravesite are both within walking distance of our campus here in downtown Atlanta. We're one of the largest MSIs in the United States. MSI in lingo, US lingo, stands for Minority Serving Institution. What that means is we're a majority minority campus. About 75% of our students are non-white. Our largest single group are our Black students, around 40% of our student body. We also enroll large numbers of low-income students. So by US federal guidelines, this semester, we're enrolling just under 30,000 low-income students. And a decade ago, the reality is our students were not doing very well. Overall, only about 30% of our students were completing degrees, and far fewer students from underserved and underrepresented racial and ethnic groups were completing degrees. For instance, only 18% of our African American male students, our Black male students, were completing degrees. So what I'm going to share is a more upbeat account, because I think what Georgia State has been able to show is ways in which digital platforms can actually help close racial, ethnic, and economic equity and achievement gaps. The reality is what's happened over the last 10 years at Georgia State is we've improved our completion rates, rates of students graduating, by 72%. But much more distinctively, and we are perhaps the only US institution that can claim this, for 6 years in a row now, our Black, our Hispanic and Latinx students, and our low-income students have all graduated at or above the rate of the student body overall. So what's happened is the graduation rates have gone up for all students, but they've gone up disproportionately for our students who are struggling the most in the past, students from low-income and racially minoritized backgrounds. That's very encouraging. The other encouraging thing is Georgia State University, which, by the way, was still a segregated whites-only institution when the Reverend Martin Luther King was living and doing his civil rights work, now graduates more Black students with bachelor's degrees than any other college or university in the entire US. So, you know, how have we gone about doing that over the last decade? In many ways, it has been by leveraging digital platforms and technologies. And in the couple of minutes I have for this introduction, I'll just give you a few examples. That one thing we were struggling with is a large number of the students we were admitting to Georgia State, about 20% of the students we were admitting and confirmed their intent to enroll, never made it to a single day of classes. What we found is that they were getting bogged down in the bureaucracy of trying to prepare for the first enrollment. There are all kinds of steps in the US students have to take, filling out applications for financial aid, producing immunization records and transcripts and so forth. And not only were each one of these bureaucratic steps weeding out a subset of the students, they were failing to complete that process and thence not making it to the first day of university classes. But when we looked at the data, each step was disproportionately harming students from underserved backgrounds. So if you were low income, if you were the first of your family to go to university, you were far more likely to be tripped up by the bureaucracy. So what we did 5 years ago is introduce a chatbot. What is a chatbot? It's an automatic texting platform. What the chatbot allows our incoming students to do is 24/7, they can text questions on their smart devices. Now, the reality is in the US, the access to some of these platforms is not as strained as in other parts of the country. Most of our low-income students do have a phone. And for those who don't, we have a loaner program. I can talk more about it that allows students to gain hotspots for Wi-Fi access and a digital device if they don't have one. But what the chatbot does is allow students to text questions 24/7. It uses AI. We built up a knowledge base of commonly asked questions by incoming students, questions about financial aid and picking courses and registration, all the kind of questions incoming students have, and put it in a knowledge base, put it on a platform that allows students to text questions 24/7. What AI does is it locates the right answer that we've already written embedded in the knowledge base, and when the student texts a question in, the AI picks the right answer out, delivers it to the student, or makes a determination there's not a correct answer in the knowledge base, in which case the AI actually delivers the question to a staff person who adds a response, so the knowledge base is constantly growing and getting smarter. So when we launched this platform in 2016, we thought maybe in the first couple months we'd have 5,000 to 6,000 questions answered for our incoming students via the platform. We had over 180,000 questions answered. Average response time was about 6 seconds. We found that the students used the platform, the chatbot, more at 1 in the morning than at 9 in the morning, which tells you something about our university practices and how they don't meet the needs of our students. We also found a lot of students telling us they asked the chatbot questions they wouldn't have asked a human being. You know, if you can't get your biological father to sign a form because you haven't seen him in the last 18 months, you don't necessarily want to go into a stranger's office and spill out your personal history. The students told us they liked the fact that the chatbot was non-judgmental. They could get their questions answered quickly and without any sort of embarrassment. And did it work? Did it make a difference? Well, since we've launched this chatbot, we've reduced the number of students who confirm their intent to enroll at Georgia State but never make it to the first day of classes by 37%. And when we look at that 37%, it's predominantly students who are from underrepresented backgrounds, from racial groups that are underrepresented in the US, or from low-income backgrounds. When COVID hit and we were having to move all our courses online, the chatbot proved a direct way of communicating with students. We had to, for instance, have students who were in university housing go home if they had a place to go, but we had to find out which students had a safe place to go. So we sent all the students in university housing last March an email that asked them, do you have a safe place to go, or are you going to be staying in university housing with us through the pandemic? After about 24 hours, only about 14% of the students had even opened up that email. On the other hand, simultaneously, we sent all the students in university housing a text via the chatbot asking them, are you able to go someplace else, or are you going to stay with us? And within about 10 minutes, we heard back from over 2,000 students. So this digital tool served as a way of cutting through some of the communication issues and information gaps that students were facing. So that's one example. We're also using predictive analytics to track our students on a day-to-day basis. We're using analytics to identify students who are at financial risk of dropping out and proactively give them grants and so forth. These sorts of approaches have, with the right kind of support, been able to take a campus that had large equity gaps between students from different racial backgrounds and create a much more equitable campus with much higher results and better results for all students. So it's great to be here today, and I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you very much. Well, I think we've heard some solutions, and one thing that really struck me listening to everybody was how important it is to analyze what the barriers are. You know, like David saying, you know, if you can't afford the internet, there's no point focusing on digital literacy or whatever. And as Tim has just been telling us, you know, you need to identify that it's the bureaucracy that's in the way and come up with ways to respond to that specific issue. And we've also heard about toolkits, and we've heard also right, I'm going to kick off questions, I think it would be good to sort of focus a bit on what can be done in a number of areas. And I just wondered, Naomi, if you'd like to say a bit more about liberating the library, or, you know, what's the learning in terms of how people have gone about that? Because I imagine that people hit some resistance sometimes, and it's complicated. It would just be great to hear a bit more about that.
Can you hear me still?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I think in the UK, there's been some difficulties. I mean, for a start, you used the term liberating the library, and I know there's some controversy around using the word decolonizing, because some people have highlighted how that's still quite a problematic word, because the people who they're talking about did not choose the word. So I think it's about, we really just need to have honest conversations. I think we need to have conversations where we, to put it bluntly, we have to just say hard truths, you know? So I wrote an article how a lot of the times, for instance, in librarianship, managers will be statistically white. So when it comes to them, they're the ones who are actually going to be able to enforce this change. And they may have their own implicit biasness, which they need to potentially acknowledge. But they also need to realize that because of their privilege, they're the ones who are actually more likely to be able to push through measurements, you know, in comparison to other library staff. So I think it's actually still talking about white privilege. I find personally in the UK there's still problems in terms of some people still don't understand that when we talk about white privilege, we're not saying that white people don't suffer. It's just saying that they don't suffer from racism. And once we get over that hurdle and we can actually start to kind of talk and enforce change, that's my perspective.
That's really interesting. So it's sort of about being able to have open and honest discussions about the inequality and the discrimination that's there, and be able to tackle it by having that honesty in work. Does anyone else want to come in on that issue about how we have those kind of honest discussions to help take us forward? Doesn't matter if not. We've got some questions coming in now from participants. So maybe if we go to a question that's come in from Rob Scasebrook, and he asks, there are significant challenges in closing the divide that are both specific and general. And could the panel share their thoughts on the smaller steps we could take to effect change? And also, what are the biggest, most common challenges that we could address together? So I suppose there's something about, you know, is there something people could today go away and do that's quite simple individually? But also, what are the big things that we really need collaboration for? Would anyone like to kick us off on that? Maybe Peter?
I feel like having listened to Timothy speak, that his position is directly involved in both the big steps and the small steps on a daily basis. And I'm not trying to put, especially someone I've never met, on the spot. But wow, I mean, I think the things you were describing were right on point.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. Thanks, Peter. I'll say this in response to the question. It's a great question. A lot of attention in the U.S. is spent on the challenges and the inequalities between the educational backgrounds of our students before they arrive at our universities. And there are gaping issues that are faced there. So that's a big challenge, right? How you begin in elementary school and middle school and what we call high school in the US, or secondary schools and so forth, how you begin to provide equal academic backgrounds. What I think the Georgia State story is really important is emphasizing is the first part of your question, that we maybe underestimate the little things and how impactful and important they are. Because we have not, as we've increased our graduation rates by 72% and eliminated equity gaps, increased our admissions criteria. In fact, by the common measure in the US, SAT scores, which is the standardized test most US students take, our incoming students are weaker now than they were a decade ago. But they're graduating at better rates, not because they have stronger academic background before they arrive at the university, but we're recognizing how complicit the university is in many of the problems that lead to students struggling and dropping out. And it is, in many cases, those little things. They don't have the right information at the right time. They don't know how to navigate a particular challenge on campus when the navigation issue could be settled in a single day or maybe a single hour, but lacking that information, they don't get the aid, they don't register for the class, they don't find out that there's tutoring or support, and as a result, they end up dropping out. So I think that the Georgia State story is one that really underlines the importance of us paying a lot more attention in our universities at the little things and the things that we have control over. We're not, I don't have a lot of control over the education of the students before they reach us at the university. I have a lot of control on how we register students for classes or advise them or distribute institutional financial aid and so forth. And it's by changing those things that we've seen a major transformation.
Thanks. And I think it's always the case, isn't it, that when you're trying to make change, having a few tangible things happen that people can see, this has changed, even if it's a small thing, it kind of builds confidence and builds momentum, and you can kind of move on from there sometimes to some of the larger things as well. We've got some questions about collaboration. So Just Sahota has asked, are partnerships and tech providers pivotal to making the technology work? And sort of who so for example at Georgia State, who facilitates the hotspots? But is this and I'm not only directing this at Tim, I'm interested in the collaboration between, for example, a university and tech providers, or maybe with other community organizations. Would anybody like to come in on that?
Personally, I would add that we also have to start a conversation about how inherently racist technology is. There have been reports done on it. So if you look at Silicon Valley, the ethnic makeup, so asking who makes this technology, there's a lot of journals and articles that look at how biased algorithms are, for instance. So when I think, yes, collaboration is great, but we also need to be talking about, like you raised, who are the people who are creating the information?
Who are we collaborating with, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's double-edged, right? I can say this because I represent a mission-based publisher. There are mission-based publishers. There are other members of the coalition who are more commercial. But at the end of the day, it is a double-edged sword. I think Naomi's hit it exactly.
And that whole thing in the disability movement, we have this phrase, nothing about us without us, and the kind of idea of co-producing, well, something like AI, for example, it's used in recruitment, isn't it? And, there have been questions about things like, do people get screened out by automated HR processes that say if you've got a gap in your career history or if you make a spelling error, that you get screened out, and so no human will ever see your CV or your resume, that sort of thing. And there are some examples now of tech companies working with different groups of people to try and make sure that those biases don't get built in. So maybe the collaboration is not just between, let's say, the universities and the libraries and the tech people, but also community-based organizations, whether that's Black-led organizations or disability organizations or poverty organizations, so that understanding is built in. David, we have you back. That's great. We were just talking about the kinds of collaboration that might help progress this agenda, whether it's between, for example, universities and tech providers, or perhaps community organisations, NGOs. Have you got any perspective on that, or any experience of the sorts of collaborations that can be useful? I think maybe we've lost Dave. Oh,
Hello?
hi, yeah.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Great. Sorry about that. When we talk about the divide, obviously we talk about technology, and if that's the conversation, then we're going to need a lot of collaboration to ensure that actually people have access to the right technology and also to the right content. So conversations obviously with tech companies is critical today. Conversations with the government is becoming very important, and also influencing policy is going to be very, very important. What's happening right now is that there's a lot of collaboration here in Uganda between tech companies and universities and schools, so that access to the internet is more agreeable, especially after the pandemic. And actually, because of this, the government is also actually partnering with schools as well, and they're providing. We've actually equipped 1,000 schools with computer labs, and the next thing is actually providing 1,500 free solar-powered iPads to actually children who can't afford these things. So, and also this is really a lot of to do with collaborations with tech companies. And of course, with the content, the publishers become very, 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 very important. And here we're looking at the issue of copyright. We just wish publishers could consider seriously being a little more open or flexible on copyright, particularly for that which supports the Marrakesh Treaty, which allows, say, libraries, for example, or anyone to transcribe their material for the print disabled. And that becomes very, very critical today. So that we don't have any issues with transcribing that material to digital formats, and also allowing it for national border transfers. So yeah, but also, of course, working with in the education field in Africa, we have a lot of collaborations with the national education and research networks that are working so closely with institutions to ensure actually that there is more equitable access to the internet. So that is helping greatly. They're creating so many packages, Wi-Fi, eduroam, and so on, all over the country, and that's being very, very useful. So yes, indeed, collaboration with tech companies are very, very critical. Thank you.
Thanks. There's another question actually on the chat, which is follow up from that in a way, which is what about mobile interfaces? Have those been important in Uganda in what you're working to do? Because I guess this varies in different countries.
Actually, what's very interesting is that when you look at the internet usage in Uganda, we have about 70% of those who use mobile smartphones to access the internet. And interestingly, actually, the women use more smartphones than the men do. Perhaps because they are more than men, but indeed their statistics are much, much higher in terms of usage. The mobile smartphone has become absolutely critical in access to internet in Uganda. It is the number one device that people use here.
Thanks. Another question, and this could be for anybody on the panel. What role do you believe technology has to play in closing the divide? And I think we've heard quite a bit from Tim, particularly about that, and in increasing it.
The divide in itself is created by access. and or the technology in itself, and that's by the lack of it. So in one breath, we need to have technology to cover the gap, because if you don't have it, then actually if you don't have technology at all, you don't have a divide in the first place. But because you have technology, then we do have a divide. So in every sense, it's all about technology. So we need to build more technology. We make technology more affordable for people, and that also includes, of course, the computing devices and the internet connectivity, providing public computing devices and providing low cost data is very, very important.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to come in on that? Do you see the digital developments increasing the divide in any situations, or are they more? Is it more helpful, perhaps in the context of the pandemic as well? Nobody want to come in specifically on that? Okay. That's right. Tim, there's a question. Actually, two questions that are more specifically for you. One is, what's the software behind the chatbot and the predictive analytics? And the other is, do you also measure access to library information and how that contributes to graduation rates?
Great questions, both of which. This in some ways goes back to the discussion of partnerships of a few minutes ago. We have been very willing to collaborate with tech partners who are just starting out. We were the first a university partner for the chatbot technology firm. That's a company out of the Harvard and MIT incubator called AdmitHub. But the advantage, I think, for those of you who are passionate about the equity and diversity issues we're discussing today, is you can be at the ground floor of helping to design how the platform is going to work and have much more influence over it. And to be frank, you get it for a lower cost as well, because the company is just starting out. So we've done that with our chatbot, our predictive analytics. We did the same thing. We were one of the first partners with a US company called EAB, which is now a big analytics company studying student analytics and tracking when students get off path so that advisors can reach out and help the students get back on path again. We do look at library access and participation. We've not only looked at it historically, but we've looked at it post-pandemic as well. One thing I'll say that's been really important about our investment in digital platforms in light of COVID and the pandemic, including with regard to our library, is we already had systems set up where, for instance, our librarians could easily video conference with students and researchers. So because we had invested in that, when the pandemic hit, it was not the case that we saw a major drop-off in our students' ability to access resources. Just about all of the materials at our library are now available in some digital form, about 90% of those materials. So those investments we've made over the course of a decade have proven very helpful during the pandemic, because it's allowed us to function in much the way we do on a day-to-day basis. Many of our students are working, many of our students are parents, and we had to design platforms which made it easier for them to access resources without coming to campus and necessarily visiting face-to-face, and that's worked well during COVID.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much. We haven't talked very much about employment, but Peter, you mentioned it in terms of, you know, the whole sector tends to be, particularly in the senior roles, dominated by white, cisgender, male, etc. people, non-disabled. So any learning on what can most effectively shift that? I know you said you've got toolkits and stuff, but
yeah, so that's a good question, and I think it is actually one area where small things actually can see results, it can be little things. Like, I'm aware of one employer where one of the challenges that people face, hiring managers face, is they don't actually know how to go about identifying, tapping into a more diverse applicant pool. And it has to be said, that's not because the diverse applicants aren't out there. It's because the systems aren't set up and the managers aren't taught how and where to look. But there, so I'm aware of one employer, is what I was going to say. Their company's policy toward trying to increase the diversity of their workforce is that hiring managers are still free to make whatever hiring decisions they want without intrusion, without influence, quotas, whatever term you want to attach to trying to increase diversity through statistical representation that way. But they're not allowed to make a hiring decision until they've interviewed 3 people from diverse backgrounds. Yeah. Super simple, right? And the thing about, one of the elegant things about that is it puts it on the hiring manager to go to tap into the pools and the resources. So in a large organization, the hiring manager knows that, and the next hiring manager has to do it, goes to that individual, at lunch over the water cooler and says, how did you tap into that network? And it actually gives people the ability to feel like they're doing something positive and constructive. And I've not been able to travel to the UK, obviously, in about a year. I can't imagine it's too much different. Here in the US, I think we could all use something small to feel positive about right now.
I think that's great. And one of the other things I know in the disability world, the research evidence seems to suggest that if you are recruiting several roles at the same time, it's a good idea to do them all together, because some employers, probably without meaning to, they see they've got just one role and they see a disabled person come and they're not confident. They don't know how this disabled person's going to fit in or what it's going to be involved, etc. They see it as a risk. But if they're recruiting 6 people and one or two of those people have a disability, then actually that sense of risk decreases. So I think there's lots of kind of relatively discrete small things like that employers can do that do start to make a difference in terms of who gets in, and then can demonstrate their achievements and their potential and move on from there. So that's really good. Has anybody else got any comments on that employment side of the equation? No? I think I'm going to, we've only got a couple of minutes. Would anybody like to have a last word, anything on your mind that you'd like to say to our assembled esteemed audience today?
I'll say something. Thank you. I am hopeful about the future of digital platforms. I think what we've all struggled to do in higher education for generations is deliver personalized attention to students. What we found at Georgia State is that in the past, we didn't have the resources to do so. We enroll over 50,000 students. Most of them are low income. Our tuition fees are low. We didn't have the staffing to deliver personalized attention. What technology has enabled us to do is on a day-to-day basis, deliver much more personalized attention to our students. And the students are responding in a very positive fashion. So that's why I'm optimistic about the future. We need to resolve the digital divide. But when we do so, and I think Georgia State has begun to do so, the results can be transformative.
Yeah, I think that's great. And it's about so much better use of resources, isn't it? And the real potential of digital development. Well, it's been a fantastic session. Thank you so much. Some of the things I've taken away, I think, are about the importance of affordable, inclusive, both small and system-wide changes done in collaboration, and those collaborations not just being between the content specialists and the tech people, but also with the communities directly involved, the students, the people of colour, people with disabilities, etc., also involved. And I think we've heard some great examples of practical steps that can go a long way based on that real analysis of the way these disadvantages intersect. And I think we've heard a lot about that in terms of social class that we talk about in the UK, ethnicity, and gender and other factors. So it's been a very rich discussion. Thank you so much. But with that, I think we should sign off, and huge thanks to all our speakers. Thank you very much for giving us a huge amount to think about. Thank you.